Right, good morning everyone. Hi. Hello, hello. I get my camera set up and working. Get the sound a little higher so I can hear myself through my headphones. Hi, welcome to another stream of Lyrebird Edits. Thank you for allowing me to take the night off on Thursday. But it's good to be back for the 9 a.m. session. I like these sessions. I like how it takes me longer to warm up, and I feel like I don't know. I think I work differently at different times of the day. Some people really prefer working in the morning. I know Naz Gula said that she wakes up and she feels that she's a lot more sort of primed and fresh to write, whereas I work better in the evenings, but not too late. I don't know. Hmm. This is a point where I'm supposed to be like, audience engagement. When do you, work better? When's your optimal working time? Let me know in the comments. And if you need a website, use Squarespace. So, hi, OutriderSG. Hello, hey, good morning, Wookie MC. Cool, so, a couple of things to note. Number one, most of the characters speak with a Hackney British accent. Great. The main character speaks with an American accent. Okay, I will try my best to butcher that with my lovely neutral Australian accent. It's not really halfway, but we'll see how we go with that. This won't need to be edited because it's amazing in every way. Okay, great. Well, thanks for tuning into the stream. I guess we're done. If it's amazing in every way, I can't do anything. The microphone is plugged in. This is a good sign. Yeah, nothing quite like nothing quite like starting off the stream with the microphone plugged in when I press record. That's a pro tip for you streamers out there. Make sure your microphone is on. That's interesting. You ramble right later on, huh? That might work. It may work better for some stories if you're trying to ramble right, or like a stream of consciencelessness, stream of conscience. Um, but I guess if you want a tighter narrative, you gotta do what works. It's none of your business. Move on. Alrighty. So I think the aim with today's stream with OutriderSG's story, I know that I'd say that I get a little bit of fresh blood on the stream, but I didn't have enough time to go searching. Although I did get a message from Panfro. Yes, that's right, Panfro underscore. Um, who mentioned that someone on Reddit was linking back to the stream. So hi Panfro, welcome into the circle. I don't know if this is a circle or what we've got going on here, but yeah, I'll when you send through something, I'll push it into the stream queue. And I think just for what we're doing here, um, this shouldn't take. I mean, I'm not sure how long I'll spend on Fadewalker. All of that rambling there was to push into this thing I'm going to say right now, which is that today's stream I'll try and be a little more developmentally focused. Usually on Lyrebird edits, we're very granular, so we go read a chunk, we go through it sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. I'll still be doing a bit of that, but I think what I really want to do is focus on the development of the story, how stuff is linking together, and how the narrative is all being presented. It's a little different from a line edit, and I'll explain why in a second after I read through this. Blood is plenty fresh. My compliments on your fresh blood. It sort of is a cult OutriderSG, yeah. It's a short story, 17 pages. Actually, yeah, OutriderSG, what are you aiming for here? Is this it's a 7,000 word, but do you want it to be a short that ended up at 7,000k? No, 7k. Okay, cool. And the point of view switching where it's jarring, whether it's not, whether it works. That's really good to figure out. Yeah. I noticed that a couple of books recently that I saw in the bookshop looked really interesting, and I went on to Goodreads to do the classic, what do other people think about this book? And this one book in particular got a lot of fairly good criticism, not angry criticism, but just criticism about the way that it was handling points of view shifting. And people were often saying, I couldn't get my head around who was talking or why it was presented in this way. It seemed like a jumble of ideas. And that's just as an abstract concept. So POV switching is it's great if it works well, and if it doesn't, it will piss off your reader. So it's one of those things. Like even published books get this wrong. So and by wrong I mean it doesn't click with the style of story, and the reader doesn't understand why you're doing it. POV shifts can be tricky and purposefully tricky. It's just a matter of being convincing and doing that. Nice, and that's exactly what I want to know. Good, good, good. Alright, anything else I need to talk about before we get going? I will be focusing on the development here. And yeah, if you've got any stories to send to me, please do. And then we can kick OutriderSG out of the queue. No offense to OutriderSG. And thank you for sending the story in too. I just want to share the lie. Oh, I don't want to say Lyrebird love, that sounds awful. I want to share the opportunity for other people to have their stuff edited too. I'm not sure I even know 7K words. Lovely. Okay, let's start. Let's jump right in. This I think is a little bit of a epic fantasy-ish story. Yeah, exactly, OutriderSG. Screw you for sharing this story with us. But yeah, yeah, actually, let's dive right in. We don't need to have a blurb or a synopsis going. Alrighty, let's start. Let me just check that I'm not cutting off part of my head. Yeah, there we go. It's good that you see the lyrebird quaff. That's the heart and soul of the stream. Rumor was the stranger came from beyond the mountains of Lyre, or Lear. Fishmongers muttered it as he rode past, the tanners at their rack, the weavers at their loom, and the steelsmiths at their forge. All of them said the man was from the desert lands of the Red Dunes. He was from the high plateau, the seat of the empire of Dire. The whispers were right about me. Talk of the outsider had preceded my arrival. It made sense. No one else had survived the fall of the Sky Realm, my home, though that was not nearly the half of it. I narrowly escaped with my life, for what worth that was to me now. Taylor had been stolen away, ripped from this world into the realm of the Faded Ones. I watched the light drain from her as I fell, and the last that I remembered before darkness took me and the last that I remembered before darkness took me was the green of her eyes. The shrouded huntsman had pursued the man south and west and south again, from the dunes to the Sea of Arrows. The Port of Storms, some folk called it. The journey had taken 2 weeks by foot, and 2 more on the back of the horse he had stolen. And it was late afternoon. The chat's blowing up here. Sorry, I'm gonna go back and just read a little bit to make sure I'm not missing anything. That's fine. Hey, Solar Star Lord. Hi, welcome back. That's early rise. 5 a.m. Nice. I'm impressed. I'll jump back into the story. And it was late afternoon when the stranger arrived. Slogging through the muck in a small village on the outskirts of the city. Shrouded in a cloak of brown linen, hood drawn, he rode for the Undying Gate. The ancient structure had earned the name for its ability to withstand any tempest, battle, or folly. I had never been much impressed with the simple iron and wood craftwork of the lesser freeholds, but as I approached the massive wall I was belittled by its dismal sort of splendour. In the waning afternoon light, that great barrier appeared as black as the veil of shadows itself. It had been forged of towering onyx wood, hard as granite. Each shaft of timber was soaked and aged in resin for 10 years before finding its place within the stockade. Bands of dark, cold-rolled steel spanned the width of the gate. I'd heard it said that not even the might of a scorpion ballista could pierce the structure. For 500 years the wall had stood, and no army had been able to breach it, or so rumour was. The horse came to a halt. Stepping out from a gatehouse atop the structure, a round man with broad shoulders peered down at the stranger. "Oi, what's your business in the city, outsider?" So he's gonna have a British accent. So just imagine that was more British than what I said. Trade. The least that I needed was, the least that I needed were more curious eyes upon me, especially those attached to bodies that bore steel. I was in no shape for a fight. "Trade," he says. The round man wore a tempered breastplate over a simple leather jerkin, the uniform of those soldiers on the wall, and the streets beyond. But his was fresh with hammer marks, recently forged, or recently reforged, doubtless to stretch over his large gut. Even his helm was bulbous. "You don't look like no trader. The way I hear it, you're from up north, far north. Do you believe the word of every waif and whore who crosses your path, friend? Whores speak truer than most, I've learned, but I put no stock in rumour. I'll have you know, I trust only what my eyes be telling me, and just now, they's telling me you look right fucked." Hard to argue. My arms shielded my ribs, betraying the presence of bruises that hid beneath the layers of boiled brown leather and grey linen. But even those sores did not hurt so bad as my ankle. The man's leg had caught the rocks as he fell from the trident. A trinity of waterfalls that spilled from the presidium of the imperial palace in Dire. He awoke upon the banks of the Silver Spill. Its gleaming waters flowed from the Rush, a small lake at the foot of the high plateau. The river snaked south through the narrow pass in the mountains and into the Wolfswood beyond them. From there it cut west across the marshlands of the Mirkwater, then further south to empty into the Arrows. The outsider had followed the road along the riverbank, gaunt and half-starved by the time he reached Longmarket. I never have thought to sink so low as a horse thief, but the huntsman had pressed the matter. He was a mystery to me, a murderous thing, a dark courser layered in black steel and leather, his face cloaked in shadow behind hooded furs. I hadn't sighted him since the trident, but I felt his presence always. I'll go to the end of this page, I think. I'd loaded near the stables behind the only inn in Longmarket, watching the holster? Yeah, watching the holster groom and shoe a black charger, the largest destrier I'd ever seen. The boy worked tirelessly, moving from one horse to the next with his shoe pick, curry comb, and brushes. As the day grew long and hot, he cast off his hooded coat and continued his labours. I snuck into the stables after the boy retired for the evening, and saw that he had forgotten the garment. One crime begat another, and I swept it over my shoulders. Creeping into the stall of the great destrier, I saddled him, then rode from the market under cover of darkness, and I had made south, following the road that chased the Silver Spill, stopping only to allow the horse to water and feed. The round man studied me for a beat, then pegged me for my profession undeclared. Seeing as we've settled the matter, regarding my stance on the word of whores and your general buggered demeanour, I'm disinclined to be letting you through this here gate. Grey band. He was no simpleton, I came to realise. Alright, let's deal with this. Right after I go and put some socks on. Hang on. It's the end of winter and it's getting colder, in some ways, but milder in others. I don't know how to explain it. But my feet are cold, so I'm gonna put socks on. Hello, Sayaka. Hi, how are you? Welcome back to the stream. Um, okay, let me just have a little think about what we can talk about through these first couple of sections. One thing that I'm thinking of is how well the first and third person elements flow together when they talk about the same character. I don't think I've seen something like that before. I'm trying to think of a story I've read where the protagonist and the narrator are the same and they refer to themselves in two different ways. Um, if any of you have read a story like that, let me know. I'm trying to rack my brains for an example. Hmm. So I think in a developmental sense, it's nice how everything flows together. There's a really nice marriage of backstory and present story that I think serves this quite well. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So when we have just trying to think of a good place where I enjoyed what was happening. Um, So, for example, this one here, it may not be the best example of what I was thinking about, but the way that the present events have relevance to the past, and the past has relevance to the present. Ugh, sorry, my words are all over the place. But what I'm trying to say is that when you have a paragraph that deals with both present and past elements of the story, um, the way that they're married together is really nice. So hard to argue. My arm shielded my ribs, betraying the presence of bruises that hid beneath the layers of boiled brown leather and grey linen. Um, but it's not as bad as my ankle. And then here we have this backstory. Now, um, this works neatly, regardless of if the narrator begins to refer them to themselves in the third person or not. Like, pretend that this is his leg, or sorry, my leg. It would be first person now. So my leg had caught, blah blah blah. I had awoken. The river had snaked. From there, I cut across, blah blah blah. So if you convert it all to first person, it's um, with the narrator embodying that character naturally in a way that we're used to in a story. Um, this is a good technique to push in past information into the present. Um, Perhaps for a novel, this wouldn't be as necessary, but because we're dealing with a short story where opportunity to talk about past events is going to be a little more scant, it's more permissible in that sense to have this kind of flitting backwards and forwards between present and past events. So I quite like that. Um, since the lens, does it feel squarely enough through the character's eyes? It's a good question. Certainly, I think the present events have that to them. The past events, um, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. I need to go back and sort of highlight areas like that. We can talk about that. Um, all the frames, Sayaka. Um, So, for example, just what I was talking about before, there's an area here where the narrator talks about waiting for the stable boy to finish his work before saddling up and riding into town on the stolen horse. Now, in a novel, you wouldn't strictly need this kind of information. It feels a little extra, just in terms of maybe not the scene itself, but just the length that it's afforded. But because this is a self-contained 7,000 word short story, I'm more inclined to be amenable to having these bigger chunks of past events alongside the present. So, in terms of how it's all fitting together, I think the real key is in the first paragraph. I remember when, um, I remember when you pasted something like this into Discord. Um, let's read through this again, and I think this can be the key that helps us to understand the rest of the story. Um, hmm. I think Mookie MC has raised a really good point about as long as it reveals something new and necessary about the character. I think that's right. If it's unnecessary in terms of at that present moment in the story, why are we getting an information dump about XYZ? That's the best measure as to whether or not you should be at all talking about um, the backstory elements from that point. So, for example, here, um, this tells you something about his physical state, and then the way that the narrator then takes a step back and talks about himself in the third person is tied directly into his physical state here. So not only are we getting a bit of information about the present tense character, but also what led up to that event as well. And I think that's a really good way to do it. It makes it feel less like it's a dump and like a sort of blur. Here it is, all sorts of information. And instead, you have it being directly correlated with something that's going on in the present tense. Let's read this first paragraph again. Rumor was the stranger came from beyond the mountains of Lyre. Fishmongers muttered it as he rode past. The tanners at their rack, the weavers at their loom, and the steelsmiths at their forge. All of them said the man was from the desert lands of the Red Dunes. He was from the high plateau, the seat of the Empire of Dire, or Deer. All of that is in a sort of very typical kind of third person narration. And then you get this left field turn here with the whispers were right about me. And so all of a sudden we've got this really sharp kind of perpendicular, like at a right angle turn, um, that gives us an understanding of who the narrator is and how he's going to be talking throughout the progression of the story. So this is really important. If you're going to do something like this, do it as Sean did, to put it in the first paragraph and make your reader aware that this is going to be a constant thing. Constant, not as in incessant, but constant as in the backbone of how the story is going to be told. Just live commenting. Don't give the anonymous sheep that power. No. I think I can edit, or suggest at least. Sorry to. Yeah, right. Mm. Yes, yes, you will, OutriderSG. You will only regret this. Only bad things can happen when you give people control of your story. Like, look, this lingering with intent. What's going to come here? He's going to comment on the fishmonger's muttered it, which I agree. I don't like. But as I promised, I would be a lot less granular in this edit that we're doing today. But yeah, feel free to make a comment if it's actually a good point. Like, Fishmonger's muttered it has, yeah, it sounds a little bit clunky. You could be a bit stronger if you got rid of the it. So thank you, Lee Everett. What exactly is it? The rumor? I think it's definitely a rumor. You can. That's a good suggestion, Lee Everett. Thank you. My compliments on your good suggestion. Um, okay, I can still have a little peep line by line, sure. A lot of Shrek references. No. Hmm. I'd suggest putting in an M dash here. You can do an M dash here as well, but let's just putting something understandable. Understandable. I don't know. Maybe that sort of fits the character a bit better. Um, I was going to suggest a full stop here, but then a full stop there. I'll let you decide whether or not the semicolon here is appropriate. I think grammatically it's okay, but you can also replace it with the M dash 2 and be consistent. So it's a tiny suggestion. I'm not going to lose too much sleep over that. One thing I will talk about though is the overabundance of the sort of place markers. Red Dunes, High Plateau, Empire of Dire, Lear. So I feel like one of the big stumbling blocks in any fantasy story is the overabundance of place names. Um, that may be a bit of a stumbling block for the first paragraph. Um, Lee, can you change to suggestion mode just so I can see what was there before you made the changes? Um, everything. It does, yeah. If you go to suggestions, that means that we can see what it was like before we changed. Nice. Megan's run this joint. I quite like that actually, yeah. I think that's a good suggestion. Yeah. Also, you need space. Oh, morning pumpkin pie addict. Sorry, I didn't realize that was you. Good to see you back. Um, so one thing I will make a comment on is I'm gonna make a comment on Red Dunes. Feel free to keep going, Sayaka. If Outrider says it's okay, of course. But one thing about openers and fantasy stories is that you often don't want to overwhelm there are 4 here, I think. Red Dunes, Empire of Dire, the High Plateau, and Lyre. There are 4 so far, and I consider keeping it to 2 interrelated. Oop. I mean, I'm not going to say maximum, but um, that's not really a hard suggestion. It's just more of um a guide to Like, on the one hand, you do want to give a sense of place to your story. On the other hand, you don't want to make your story feel like it's just taking place over a huge sprawling map. Um, I'd be content with knowing that he came from one place that was a desert or a forest or a plateau or something like that. But maybe it's just a small suggestion. Hmm. I like that idea too, yeah, about going back to them further on. Whoa. Wow, that's a serious writing effort. 50K words in 10 days. Ha, that's awesome. Wow, congrats. Well done. Now you have to go back and edit it. That's the next step. Step 1 is writing and step 2 is editing. But yeah, congratulations. That's really cool. I'm not sure if figures, this is Lee Everett's suggestion, fits for a high fantasy setting. I think figures sounds a bit too modern for my ears. Understandable, maybe it has a bit more of an old world ring to it, but maybe it's just my sort of take on it. Hmm. Um, so as far as openness go, what I was originally going for here and talking about all of this was, I suppose it's this. The whispers were right about me. Regardless of what we say about the paragraph in total, I think this is important that we have um, this chunk here that's then followed by the whispers were right about me. Talk of the outrider, or the outsider, had preceded my arrival. Understandable, no one else had survived the fall of the Skyrealm, my home, though that was not nearly the half of it. I'd narrowly escaped with my life, for what worth that was to me now. Taylor had been stolen away, ripped from this world into the realm of the Faded Ones. I watched the light drain from her as I fell. And the last I remember before darkness took me was the green of her eyes. Um, so then we have this chunk here, which is um, two and a tiny bit paragraphs. The events of this paragraph here detail of like Taylor, the loss of Taylor. In the next paragraph, we have a shrouded huntsman had pursued the man south and west and south again from the dunes to the Sea of Arrows. I'm fine with that place name dropping. It's from X to Y. The Port of Storm, some folk called it. The journey had taken 2 weeks by foot, and 2 more on the back of the horse he had stolen. So this is it's a good little sort of summary of these events that are alluded to a little later on. So I think that's fine. The only thing that I'd say is that within this chunk here, there's quite a lot that happens in a very short space. The detail is how to put it. Not generic because that implies that it's just sort of run of the mill. Standard also is not what I'm going for. It's the sort of detail that you put into a story in order to ground its drive. So it's fundamental to how it works, but the way in which it's pushed forward, I'm not sure. The the reason why I'm sort of pulling it up a little bit in a narrative sense is because I'm trying to marry the first and third person narration styles here. So, um, in terms of what Lee's doing with making comments here, I think that would probably fit. I haven't actually been reading it. But still Taylor away. Fails. Yep. So the details that we're working with here, I think I agree with these sort of suggestions here. Um, I'm just wondering why this chunk precedes this chunk, and also if the first and the third person works well together. For example, this is first person, then this goes into the third person dry narration. Dry narration. It's not dry. It's just it's less personal to the actual protagonists themselves. This is tricky. Does this work? I narrowly escaped with my life. I feel like I'm missing a little linker here. Even if you get rid of this line about green eyes, which does feel a bit extraneous, if you get rid of that, um, what's concerning me here is the link between these two ideas and how we can still use the first and third person narration styles together to effect. And that's the crucial point here. It's not so much that that it switches from first to third person. That's the style we're going for. How do you make it work when you're dealing with two events that are both background events and yet they're told in different ways? Let me go back and have a little read. Just... Pumpkin Pie Addict, you use like speech annotation software, don't you? Is that how you write? Or am I thinking of someone else? Maybe. What we really need to know is the time and place, you know? Yes, that's right. Hello, Octavia Memories. Hi. Um, feel free to hit me up in Discord and we can have a chat. The name's Red Tunes, the Hypertone, the Emperor of Light, all named in the same place. Okay. That's interesting. So all of these things here, the Red Dunes, the High Plateau, the Empire of Dire. Um, I almost got that impression, and I think the way you could do it is getting rid of this. So, for example, man came from the desert lands of the Red Dunes, from the High Plateau, from the sea. If you keep repeating from, um, like from this place, from that place, from that place, that then would undo my criticism of it feeling like you're just dumping different places. This is clever if you want to repeat that because it means that this sentence here is three subjects: tanners, weavers, steelsmiths. These could be three rumors about place one, place two, place three, but the way that it's written implies that it's the same place. So simple fix there. You just take out this thing here, put from, and the repetition should help solidify that notion that it's the same place. I like that actually. I like that better than it being different facets of the same place, but it's just the same place. Let me go back and read the comments. Hang on. Yeah, Pumpkin Pie Addict was asking anyone knows some books that switch first and third person narration out of curiosity. Um I was wondering the same thing. But if anyone's got an example, please let me know, let us know, because it'd be really interesting. Because then we can recommend it to Sean, and then Sean can see how other people have done it. Because I don't know, I'm coming up blank with an example of a narrator that is a character in the story that does first and third person narration like this. I've written stories in the past where the third person narrator ends up being a character in the story, but in a very in different ways. This is a more fundamental process. So Oh yeah. Thanks for saying OutriderSG. I was wondering whether or not having two people like editing at the same time was distracting. Um, yeah. Thanks for saying. Uh, I think Octavia Memories is onto something there about you have to be really careful with the point of view switches, which we were talking about before at the start of the stream. It's difficult to do well, and if you don't do it well, you'll piss your reader off. So we will have to consider that. Oh, hi, Panfro. Hi. Welcome to the stream. Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs. Wow, okay, cool. Well, it's mostly a compilation of loosely related vignettes. Okay, right. That would make it interesting to sort of compare to a more traditionally structured story like this, with the narrator sort of pushing throughout. But we should check that out, and I think that'd be interesting to see how another author does it. So yeah, cool. Thanks for the suggestion, and welcome to the stream too. I remember that Simpsons joke, Pumpkin Pie Addict. I can think of at least two things wrong with that title, Nelson says as he walks out of the cinema with Naked Lunch. Cool. Next stream will be, I think, Thursday, Psycho? I'm sorry, not Psycho, Octavia Memories. Although I may not be here Thursday night, in which case I'll pick another night this week to stream on. Stay tuned to Discord, and I'll tell you when. Oh, that works. I love it. That was in relation to that. Cool. Sorry, I'm at 9:47 in terms of my comments. Give me a minute to catch up. The Pendragon series switches between the first and third person perspective of Bobby, who is writing a journal. Nice. And Mark and Taylor, who is reading the journal. That's really good. Um, Hi, Justin Toons as well. Hello, welcome back to the stream. Welcome back. That's a good way to do it if you have two different mediums and you're switching between a letter and a present event. That's a good way to do it. I lied about what happened in the book. The Name of the Wind technically does it when a character is telling the story of a different character. Okay, that counts too. That's very interesting. That's a nice way of marrying them together. Breakfast for Champions. I haven't read that. Um, it sounds like something Kurt Vonnegut would do. Um, that would be up his alley in terms of the way he writes. Whether anything a Simpsons quote. It's a great Simpsons moment. Hmm. All right, sounds good. Octavia Memories. Sounds good. Hmm. It, it certainly comes across as being quite how to put this, like you're rejecting the norms of how you tell a story. Um, and I think that as long as there's a good justifiable reason why it's happening, then it works, and I think no one can really criticize it then. The trick is to having a convincing reason for why we're doing it. Let's have a bit of a think about that. Um, right, it took the words right out of my mouth. If you're just doing it to do it, then don't. I think I agree with that. And it's a simple fix if there's no reason. You can make a reason. The reason that immediately comes to mind for me is the idea of an unreliable narrator, like in Life of Pi, for instance, when the events of the story are shrouded in a very particular focus, and it's done for a reason. In that case, it was to hide the horror of what was happening in a present tense kind of way. Um, so, for example, in this story here, um, the reason for why this character is doing what they're doing may be because they are ashamed of their actions. Case in point is when we were down in this section here. I'm gonna do shoulders. So in addition to becoming Uh, horse thief. Sorry, I need to look at... Nope, not 13. 1, 2... Yep. I'd never thought to sing solo as a horse thief, but the huntsman had pressed the matter. So, I like this because it offers the reader a glimpse as to why the narrator may be referring to themselves in this... Sorry, I'm not spelling things properly. Themselves in this first 12th person. I don't think this was intentional, but as I said before, we can easily inject a reason as to why there's a first third person split within this story by picking a point at which we can expose a weakness of the character. And like a good character weakness. I'd never had thought to sing solo as a horse thief, but the huntsman impressed the matter. Perhaps we can leverage the MC's unease at having to betray his morals in order to justify why he may be telling some parts in third and others in first person. I'm going to make an addendum to that. Perhaps we can leverage the MC's unease at having to betray his morals in order to justify why he may be referring to himself in third person and others in first. For example, when he does something virtuous or upstanding, it's first person, and when he has to refer to himself doing less than honorable things, it's third. Your reader will pick up on this very quickly, and I think that could be a really interesting way to tell a story, in that the narrator is distancing themselves from what they don't want you to see, and then when the narrator is doing something virtuous or good or being brave or standing up to this piece of crap who's been stuffed into a suit and who won't let him into the city, he can appear more noble and virtuous and strong in a first-person sense. That may be why this split is happening. I like the fact that this split exists between first and third person. I want it to work. So, because otherwise this then becomes more or less like a sort of, I don't want to say conventional, but it loses something that could be special about the story. If we could think of a way to make a justifiable reason as to why this is told in this narration style, then let's go for it. Thank you, Outrider. I'm gonna go back and read. Hang on. Sorry, when I look over here, it's to my second screen where I have Twitch chat. This Twitch chat here on this screen is only this long, so once it disappears, it disappears. So I have to go over here to chat with you. So Octavia Memory says, in American Psycho near the end of the book, the perspective switches, but only because our protagonist is losing his mind. Fun fact about American Psycho, I'll try and find a picture of it. Here it is. It's a very specific image I'm after. Copy image address. Let me paste this into Twitch chat. Can I paste links? I can. I am a god amongst my own stream. But this is American Psycho. In Australia, it's one of the only pieces of fiction to be restricted like this. This is very unusual. It's it has to be sold shrink wrapped in stores, and it has to have this R sticker over the front of it. I think this is still the case. Um, it's not a banned book; it's just restricted from minors. Um, one sec. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Look, there are some very intense scenes in American Psycho, the book, that I mean, it's uncomfortable to. I haven't read the whole book itself, but I've read the scenes in question that I think push the rating up into this weird restricted category. Look, it's intense, but it's not as bad. Well, I mean, have I read other things like it? Yeah, and I think there are books that have been published in the last. I mean, when was this book published? It's American Psycho was published. Sorry if I'm getting a little sidetracked, but I think this is interesting to talk about. Sorry, OutriderSG, bear with me. 1991, yeah, that makes sense because there have been a lot of books published since that have been equally as lurid, if not more lurid, in terms of their depictions of violence and sexual violence as well. So I don't think this would be repeated, but I think because once it's classified, you can't. You can appeal a classification rating, but I mean, I don't know. In some ways, it's kind of sexy. Like, oh, your book's so out there that it has to be banned by the Australian government, and etc. etc. So, yeah, it's interesting. So, fun fact about American Psycho. I don't think any other book has been banned. Well, sorry, restricted and categorized like this. All right, back on track. So Sean says that he wants to. This was at 9:54, so about 8 minutes ago. Then bear with me. This is where I'm at in chat. He wants to sort of drag the camera out of the scene, describe everything in a third person, push the camera back in, and have events going in like a first person style. I know exactly what you mean. I'll keep that in mind as we go through. What's my character? Right, so dissociative personality disorder, from what Octavia Memories was saying. I tried to write a story like that years ago, but it didn't come out well. I think you got to be careful that you don't make it gimmicky when you're dealing with something like DPD, because there's a temptation to marry mental illness with a writing style, and I think it works if it works, and if it doesn't, it makes it fall flat on its face. So it's like with anything in writing, we have to sort of be clever in how we marry themes with narration. For example, you don't want to have a very clear, um, calm narration of a very traumatic event, unless you're doing it for a reason. We have to sort of tailor the way that we write things to how we write things. That's like kind of writing 101, I guess, isn't it? Um, Spanfro says, Oh yeah, no, actually, says at least we're not taking away memes. Yes, the government's not taking away our memes just yet. The great meme uprising will happen one day, though. We'll fight for our right to meme. Mm. If the POV split will occur multiple times throughout the story, you could get away with something like what Lyrebird suggested, allow the reader to recognize negative character traits revealed and then positive ones accepted. That's just one thing you could do. There's a whole palette of stuff we can deal with. It's just the first thing that came to my mind when I remembered the horse thievery that happened down here. Memes of September. Beautiful, I love it. So right, I think that's partly the other side of the equation that we have to deal with as well. It's not only the case that we have to work with making this fluid enough, this first third person split, but we also have to make it intuitive so that it's not bashed over your head that now it's this kind of writing, now it's that kind of writing. It has to be intuitive. This is the balance that a writer has to strike all the time. It's that notion that you have to be generous enough to your readers, but not too generous so that you're belittling them. It's hard, isn't it? Yeah, was that a real thing that happened recently? Um, let's actually push forward a little bit. I don't know how much I want to talk about the actual. Actually, no. Let's go through and deal with more of these events as they come. Again, with the purpose of this edit, I'm not so much fidgeting over the line by line stuff, but let's just push through and have a see if anything jumps out at me. I don't want to be too granular with this edit. And it was late afternoon when the stranger arrived, slogging through the muck in a small village on the outskirts of the city. I don't mind the "and," but we need to just make sure that the last paragraph ends in a way that justifies the end. Because I'm always a fan of starting paragraphs and sentences with conjunctions. It just needs to be justified. Right, so this is okay as it is. I think it just needs to maybe be a little more fluid. You can come back to that in a later edit. And it was late afternoon when the stranger arrived, slogging through the muck in a small village on the outskirts of the city. It's quite a blank description. Maybe that can kind of feed into what's about to happen, which is this this big onyx wood gate. Shrouded in a cloak of brown linen, hood drawn, he rode for the undying gate. Excuse me. The ancient structure had earned the name for its ability to withstand any tempest, battle, or folly. I'd like this to be demonstrated, if you could. I'd like shown, if you could, if you would be so kind. You can do this really easily with maybe consider a 1-2 punch. Sorry, that looks like a half punch. Declare the gate is weathered, then show how. So like how I do that is he rode for the undying gate. The ancient structure has million tempest, battle, or folly. This over everything else in the village. Would surely stand against the test of time. That's the one. That's the. I'm declaring to you that this is like an amazing structure, and then you can go in with the So I'll let you fill in the blanks there. This is just a little suggestion. The ancient structure and the name for its ability to withstand any tempest, battle, or folly. I feel like you could rework this little description here with something that's a little tighter, and also says the same thing but with fewer words. I was belittled by its dismal sort of splendor is... I'm not sure if it's the strongest. The darkest dungeons narrated, just took notes. It works if you want to follow it up with something interesting. Like in the waning afternoon, like the Great Barrier appeared as black as the Veil of Shadows itself. This refers back to something that we know is important to the character, because that's why they're mentioning it. Even if we don't know exactly what it is, it's got enough internal weight to it that, oh, a Veil of Shadows, I kind of get what that could be. So I think that's fine. It had been forged of towering onyx wood hard as granite. Each shaft of timber was soaked and aged in resin for 10 years before finding its place within the stockade. That's interesting. That's an interesting tell. So when people tell you you don't tell your details, show it, you can counter with, okay, but this is good. This is a good tell. I'm always a fan of getting people to show their detail, but also realizing that telling detail can sometimes be really effective, and I think this is a good example of a nice tell. So my compliments on the tell. I like the sentence. But it would be stronger. It'd be stronger if the stuff before it was a little more condensed. Like, we've spent this much time chewing through the gate. How many sentences is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've spent 5 sentences. It would be even stronger if the preceding 5 sentences were to be a little more condensed. And by a little more, I mean a lot more. Like down to 1 or 2. Preceding is like that. More condensed. Very good. Hang on, you can paste links here. I'm gonna copy this link into this browser and open it up before... Lovely. It's, well done. Bellissimo. Very nice. So when should you tell a detail over showing a detail? That's a really good question. Sometimes I like to tell detail when the detail itself is foreboding, or if it doesn't necessarily need too much of an emotional core that underpins it. So for example, you could show all this detail from the Undying Gate in a different way. You could have your character walk up to it and be overwhelmed in an emotional sense. A bit like this, but in a way that's a bit more visceral. So as I approach the Undying Gate, I felt a shiver overcome me. There was as if an army of undead spirits were marching through my soul, blah blah blah. Like, you can be as poetic as you want, but you can demonstrate the detail through an emotional show. But sometimes it's just nice to have a block visual description that tells you the detail and then just gets on with the story afterwards. Not every detail needs to be shown, and not every detail should be told. So when should you tell over a show? I would say it's not so much a question of when you should tell. In my mind, it's more, when can you get away with not showing? That's a slightly better way to think about it. Because sometimes you write a sentence and you're really keen for it. You think, yep, this is fantastic. Type, type, type. You read back and you're like, it's just told all the detail though. I think you read in the context of the paragraph and you go, no, actually it's good. It fits. I like the detail it presents. I like how immediately before it I had something that was a bit emotional to the character, and I just wanted a grounding description of X. That is a justifiable tell. So it's not a case of should you tell over showing, it's more in the natural writing of a story you will invariably do both, and I think it's about justifying when and where it comes. And that isn't intuitive. It has to be intuitive, unfortunately. It's not that I don't trust you, Sayaka, it's just that I've been burned in the past by other people and their links. Actually, that's not true, that's never happened. But it would be remiss of me to not check what links are. Yeah, exactly. I think that's right, Justin Toombs. You want a balance of both. Um, Bands of dark, cold rolled steel span the width of the gate. So, for instance, here, after all of this detail, 5 sentences, resin, like this resin thing is so interesting that I don't care about the blah 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 gate. So sometimes like the more you tell detail back to back, the less interested that I am as a reader. So this is a great tell because it's on the back of a really interesting sort of setup, which you can make a bit more emotional and a bit more concise. But then we don't need that because we've had a really good description before, and now it's time to move on. I'd heard it said that not even the might of a scorpion ballista could pierce this structure. This is an interesting sort of like side note. I don't know what to call this, but I like it, so let's keep it in. For 500 years the wall stood, that's a bit of history, and no one may be able to breach it, also rumour was. The horse came to a halt, full stop. I quite like how just short that is, and then off we go. Stepping out from the gatehouse atop the structure, a round man with broad shoulders peered down at the stranger. Oi, what's your business in this city outsider? Trade? The least that I needed was more curious eyes upon me, especially those attached to bodies that bore steel. I was in no shape for a fight. I think it's quite verbose, but it gets the point across. Trade, he says, the round man wore a tempered breastplate over a simple leather jerkin, the uniform of his soldiers on the wall and the streets beyond. That's a sentence fragment, so you can't have a semicolon there. I don't think we need to imply that everyone beyond the wall wears it, unless that's a really important thing later on. Even okay, let's deal with what this paragraph's talking about. It's talking about this. But his was fresh with hammer marks recently reforged, doubtless to stretch over his large gut. Even his helm was bulbous. This is the reason why this detail here exists. So I think like we can come in and do like a line by line edit, but understanding it in context is important because I don't want to like fiddle with this when this is the real meat. So for example, we can get rid of all of that, um, except for the recently reforged. Maybe this. I would rather have a bit more of sort of body language here. So for example, something like the round man. Um, for example, something like the round man stretched as if you can imply that, for instance, he was sitting down for a long time, or just it's a little tricky. Replacing this with body language means that we have to link it with. But his was fresh with hammer marks, recently reforged, which I think we can replace with a comma. Um, you could declare him as something like looking comical, like a buffoon. So, for example, instead of not saying wore a template breastplate over level simple jerkin, so you can say the round man um, looked comical in his armor. It's a bit too declarative, but that could be something to consider. I want to see what Psycho suggests. The portly chap. I quite like that. Giving the eye could be like as effective. Mm. For example, something like this. Here stood a pig stuffed into levers fresh with hammer marks recently reforged, doubtless to stretch over his large gut, even his helm was bulbous. Everything about this then becomes it's slightly overblown, but I mean it's comical, so maybe it could work. This is just a suggestion. I don't want this to be sort of set in stone. The point here is that what was originally just his armor is ill-shaped and ill-fitting, and he's fat. It becomes more of a unified single image. He's portly. He behaves a bit piggishly. You can say pig. You can repeat levers. Like there are lots of ways you can sort of twist this to be a little more sort of streamlined into a single idea. That's what I'm trying to get across here, rather than fine-tuning the actual words themselves. I hope I got my point across here, rather than yeah, it's to make it more unified. I like portly chap too. Um, yeah, actually, that's a good thing that Panfro said. 5 minutes ago. Sorry, Panfro. Sorry, I got in the zone then. But yeah, like if you had to pick your battles, I'd say that's quite a good thing to fall back on. It's just to tell some grounding detail. I like that. Um, it's easier for us to do as writers as well, and I think that kind of pushes the story forward. How important the story detail is. If it's minor, if it's only side information, um, yeah, exactly. It's about not boring your reader to death. Um, oh, okay, yeah. If you want to use the round man, you can use round and bulbous too. I think you could get away with both, or the pig. Either way, have a think. See if you want to marry that. Instead of using the pig metaphor, you could just make him spherical or something. I don't know. Nice. Do you believe everyone is powerful? Uh, hard to argue. This I think is quite nice in terms of how it pushes forward with sorry, pushes back. The man's leg had caught. Okay, let's read this again. So hard to argue. My arm shielded my ribs, betraying the presence of bruises that hid beneath the layers of boiled brown leather and grey linen. But even though sores did not hurt as bad as my ankle, the man's leg had caught the rocks as he fell from the trident. So maybe linking first and third person may be a little smoother if we have a neutral sentence. Why don't we... So for instance, like adding a bit of a dummy sentence like of a large bulbous mass, the fat one. Um, Nonetheless, that doesn't matter either way. Um, but even though sores could not compare to the pain of my ankle, the pain in my ankle, the pain within my ankle, yeah, did not hurt as bad as is a little clunkier. I like Psycho's suggestion there. Um, Not quite a tale of heroism, but painful nonetheless. The manslayer caught the rocks. So here we have a bit of cushioning. Why I suggested putting this in is because switching from first to third person so abruptly, I get what you're going for, but this sentence here provides me a clue, like a seed of an idea that I have brewing inside my own mind. Like I assume that when he was switching from first to third person, he was trying to sort of orate more of a orate. um, yes, no, I think that's what orate. He was trying to tell a story that was a bit more sort of detached and grand relative to what was happening to him. This direct impression, I may not be the case, but the fact is that it's space between first and third. And that's important. It just a little bit of breathing room with a hint of an idea. So the reason this is here, I'll edit this. Adds breathing room with a hint of an idea as to why the POV split is taking place. Nice. Hmm. I think I'm more in the camp of this here. I like every sentence word to mean something to the plot. There's definitely a time and place for verbose description, and I think a really great example of that is Ernst Herringbone's story, and I'm actually going to link to it. Hang on, because it's on my YouTube channel. Now there is a unreliable narrator. Yeah, here it is. So when we were editing Ernst Herringbone's story a while back, month and a bit ago, Ernst had these really lovely descriptions of where we were in an environmental sense. We really got a sense that the character that we were talking about and living with um, was in a Spanish sherry orchard. Um, and then there'd be these really lovely flowy descriptions of where we were, but crucially they were all tied together emotionally with where the character was and what she was doing. So if you want a great example of how that can be done, oh, someone's off. We'll catch. Ah, nice. We'll catch you next time, Bookie MC. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. Um, Ernst is I think a really good example of what you should try for if you want to marry Pumpkin Pie Addict's suggestion, which was working through detail to push the plot forward. Oh, okay. Hi, welcome back. That was quick. Mm. That is an effective work ethic. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's right, and that was really good to see. I think Ernst wrote a really good story. I want to see more of it actually. Yeah. So Pumpkin Pie Addict says, I agree to a degree, but I'm one of those writers who likes the fruit too much sometimes, loitering around the descriptions. I attempted to push through it in the story, marrying movement with observational detail, which is most present in the coming paragraphs as he walks down the street. Let's try and get to that area. Um, I think I don't want to talk too much about much else. I think the line by line stuff can kind of flow together. Um, Definitely consider with the horse thievery. Decide how you want that to play out. Um, right now it's first person, so right now we're dealing with a bad moral element by using first person. Not to say that you have to be bad all the time, but maybe you can think of it more like it's more of an emotional thing, I guess. Just keep that in mind for which person you choose later on for different events. I think I got up to here. Grey Band with the story. Now, I'm going to read through another chunk and then we'll go back and come here. So yeah, for those of us who joined at a bit of a different time, those of us, I usually read a chunk first and then I go back and do like a little section by section. Um, so some people may have missed me reading through the chunk of the story. It doesn't strictly matter, you can read it at your own pace, but I like to read it out loud too. So yeah, the round man studied me for a bit, then pegged me for my profession undeclared. Seeing as we've settled that matter, or seeing as we've settled the matter regarding my stance on the word of horsing or general bucket demeanor, I'm just inclined to be letting you through this ear gate, Grey Band, or Grey Brand. He was no simpleton, I came to realize. You've seen through me, friend. I am from the north, from the deserts beyond the mountains. It so happens I was in Dire for a week, but the city came under attack. I survived the chaos and made for home, only to find my loving wife had run off with all my belongings. I scrounged for what few valuables I had hidden and made south for your fine city. It was between there and here that I was set upon by nefarious types on the Black Road. They tempted robbery to their misfortune. I made good time on the road with no further incident owing to the swiftness of my companion's steed, and here I sit in the hopes of starting fresh. That's the truth of it, swear by the old ones. A sad state of affairs. The round man sounded regretful. Wisdom earned in the matter. His head swayed side to side as he stroked the black of his beard. I got naught but sympathy for those whose wives has done him so. The eyed stranger considered the measure of all he'd heard, and finally gave a signal for the guards to open the wall. A loud clank echoed through the village. I found myself unsettled by the sound of archaic metalwork as the gears and cogs ground to life. Light seemed to split the gate in two as the giant doors crept open toward me. Suddenly I was struck. A bouquet of salté, fresh baked bread, and piss. Oi, the round man weaved the stranger through. To work you're after, you might try the magistrate's office. It lies a mile down the road, straight ahead. Look for the green sign. The outsider nodded. He dismounted from the destrier, now his by right of theft. Taking hold of the reins, he held the charger by the bridle, limping past the gate and on down the mud-sleeked road that turned to cobble before him. Nature was hidden here. It was a great sprawl that stretched out ahead. Simple hovels sat adjacent, ambitious estates of siltstone and sprucewood. Cobblers and tailors, brothels and inns, the metalwork village, and the fish market all gave way to the docks and the boardwalk, which spanned the breadth of the coast. And beyond the seaport I saw them, the famous red sails of Storm Harbour. The main thoroughfare was wide enough for 2 wagons, but the side streets, the crannies of the city, were narrow, accommodating little more than 2 men a horse. For want of land, the buildings had grown tall over the centuries, and most were freshly painted in unfavourable shades of grey and brown and beige that poorly hid old scars of rotted wood and cracked stone. So I see what you mean about liking the details. It's coming through at this point here. As I made for the port, the babble of city life assaulted my senses. Do you mean babble? Sorry, I gotta change that. Oof, jeez, what did I type? There we go. Blah 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 blah. Assaulted my senses, drowned the squawk of the gulls overhead. It felt good to be surrounded by a crowd once more. For the first time in a month, I was amidst the familiarity of chaos, the comforting hubbub of the mob. I allowed the noise to wash over me. No niche or nook was spared the bustle. Head travellers haggled over price with fish vendors, armour dealers, potion peddlers, and wine merchants. On this corner and that, locals played games of chance, dice or daggers, and fifth man's bluff, gambling for silver with naive foreigners. Children ran barefoot in the streets. As they hurried past me, I felt compelled to confirm my coin purse. I'd only discovered it for myself in the stable boy's coat after the deed was done. The waifs chased a barking dog with sticks. I laughed when the hound disappeared into the sewers where they dared not follow. At the next intersection was an inn. A badger sculpted from brass sat within, keeping vigil through a foggy window. Outside, a haggard minstrel sang of legends past and present. His song breathed heroes to life, the histories of Escaharwin, the hammer of the eventide, and Jaratiram, the usurper. Oop, excuse me, got rid of the E there. Across the street, in front of the bookseller's boutique, a bard regaled the passers-by of epic battles. Passers-by is a word. He told of the War of a Storm and how the Sea of Arrows had earned its name. Further down the road, a vagrant shouted, for any who would hear it, of the will of the Old Ones, the fated gods, and their inevitable return from the fallen realm beyond the veil. From the alleyways that flanked the smell of incense, lilac, and dragonflower drifted into the street. Their horse swayed and swooned, they feigned carnal passion, pressing flesh to flesh, making easy prey of unwitting men and women who passed by. But it was the soldiers that I mindled. Sorry, mindled? But it was the soldiers that I minded as I limped on. I'm going to call this another section. He was no simpleton, he came to realize. Sorry. I don't know why I said mindled. Don't mind me, I just want to go and grab something, like a glass of water. My throat is breaking up. Back in 3 minutes, I guess? Just sit tight. Alrighty. Thanks for sitting tight. I'm surprised you guys weren't plotting anything, like you usually do when I take a step out. I don't know what this is going on about. There are two sections here that I think we should discuss. Let me have a brief moment where I just reorient myself. Where are we? Husband. So yeah, we got these two sections here where the main character relays their story through exposition, which is at odds with what we know actually happened. Um, I think because it's at odds and it's set up as like a sort of counterpoint to what we knew, like what we know has happened. Um, I think it's justifiable. However, maybe in terms of its line by line structure, it could be a little different. So in this paragraph here, um, quite a few of these begin with I. So, so for example, I was in dire, I survived the chaos, I scrounged, it was between, I made, and here I sit, that's the truth. So most of it's I. So you just reconfigure that a little bit. I try and compress it a little bit. Try and compress a little bit. Oops. I can compress some of these details down a tad. And I think someone suggested here that some body language might be interesting to throw in. I agree with that. Just to break up the story, it's... that can go either way, because if you break up the story, you do somewhat lose the immediate impression of having your story A and story B contrasted together. You kind of just want... You kind of want to pull it off like a single band-aid rip. You don't want to do it in chunks. You just want it to get it done, and then your reader goes, oh, okay, sure, I know why you're doing this. It's because it's contrasting the story that we already know has taken place. So that could be a 50-50 one. I need to see it before I can recommend it. Yeah, I don't really know if I'm all that wedded to this, but I like the fact that it was his emotion that came around to letting him into the city. That's fine. I don't think this is too much of a problem here. I think you can make it slightly stronger, but I think you know how to do it. Just sort of go through and make sure everything is tight. Try not to make it so much I did this, I did that. Okay, so then we get it was a great spore that stretched out ahead. Now, I like all of this detail. I think it's from here to here, right? We have a 454 page 454 page description of a city. Wow, wow. A 454 word description of the city. I love everything that's gone on here in terms of the depth that it makes me feel like I'm stepping into. In terms of the plot, I don't think it has any relevance, but it doesn't necessarily, well, like my reader's impression is that it doesn't have any direct consequence to the story, except maybe a few throwaway lines to things that we have dealt with before. I think there was a maybe I'm just seeing things. What do you do with something like this? Because it's an author's preference at the end of the day what they choose to show you. And Pumpkin Pie Addict and OutriderSG were having, I think, quite a good discussion here about whether or not you push the story forward with description, or if you take a step back and just say, okay, bear with me here. This is the city. Whether you do either of those comes down to you as a writer. As an editor, I have to respect that decision and say whether or not it's effective. Would I do this? No, but that doesn't mean that it's not. That doesn't mean that it's not an effective way to tell this story. It's just I wouldn't do it myself because that's not how I write. However, it's valid. Is it effective though? That's the question. And we could go through and talk a lot about how, in a developmental sense, it's fleshing out the detail of the city. It's giving us a really good impression. And I like those things. What I would suggest looking at, though, isn't so much about the what the detail is showing you, but rather who is telling. Um, so for example, blah 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 Storm Harbor. And so, for example, here, I'm not so wedded to "It was a great sprawl." I don't want to deal with that kind of edit in this session. I want to talk about, before I get distracted with the line by line stuff, this idea of the point of view and what we were talking about with first and third person. Here. So, for the majority of these 454 words that we get to ground ourselves in the... Let me just do a bit of quick maths. Hang on, 454 is 7,000. So this is 6% of the story is tied up in this description here, of just of the city. That's not so much what I wanted to... it's just for your own information. For the majority of these 454 words that wherein we find the narrator grounding the city, most of it is told in the first person. Even if we have sentences like this: cobblers and tailors, brothels and inns, the metalwork village and the fish market all gave way to the docks and the boardwalk, which, there needs to be that spanned the breadth of the coast. Now, is that first or third person? It doesn't really have a person, does it? Like, you as a first person or third person narrator could easily describe that either way, and I wouldn't know. It's a neutral sentence. It's like a zero-person sentence. There's nothing to say that it can't be first person. For example, if the sentence before it was as I took my steed down the street, I had a look around, I had a gander, full stop. Cobbles and tales, blah 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 blah, that span the breadth of the coast. That is a first person narration, but it could just as easily be third person. This is a personless narration right now, but you make it personed by starting and finishing your paragraphs with clues as to who is talking. Now, what would I recommend doing here? That depends entirely on what you're going for with the first and third person split. So it's not strictly the case that these 454 words are overblown or overwritten or purple prose or unnecessary dialogue. Sorry, no, description, not dialogue. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about this. Rumor was that the stranger came from beyond the mountains of Lear. Fishmongers muttered it as he rode past. Yeah, we'll get rid of that it. The tanners at the rack, the weavers at the loom, the steelsmiths at their forge, all agreed that the man came from the desert lands of the realm, from this, from that. The whispers were right about me. Now, that is a very distinctive kind of way that you're setting up the story, but we start to lose it. We start to lose it as not here with the horse thievery. I think that's quite clever, but we lose that sense of cleverness the more that we talk about the city. So most of it's told in the first person. However, whereas for when we had the first / third person splits, here we lose it. And I feel like if we're going to be brave with this story, I feel as though we really need to keep the magic of that device going throughout, not throughout the whole story, you don't need it everywhere, but this is a big chunk of your story, 6%, where we don't use it. Not really once. sure, you have references to like I made for the port, I saw them, which is fine, but you don't switch because all of this is still first person, despite the fact that it feels like you're taking the camera up and describing out. Um, what would I recommend doing then? What would I say to you in order to rejig this? Um, hmm. I think OutriderSG that works beautifully as you say to keep the transition between first and third more palatable. I think maybe the trouble is that I don't get a sense that the transition takes place here. So before I had my finger on the pulse of why you were doing it. You were doing it in order to. This is just my own interpretation of it, but in order to make your character distance themselves from things they don't like and to be closer to things that they do like with that first person split, or to build himself up. But here we kind of lose it. It lurches back into conventional fantasy block description writing, and we lose that sense of. So, for example, here, the main three fair was blah 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 blah. For Want of a Land, 12 Centuries, Shades of like Stone. Um, the man became lost in the chaos of the city, a pebble rolling down a river. He became one with the flow and the mesh of people, this rowdy, ragged mess of rabbling, roughhousing people, whatever. Like, we we lose that kind of essence of why you'd originally set up the first third person split. It's not so much the case that this is without merit. It's more the case that I don't expect you to be so wedded to first person here. I expect you to sprinkle in more of that third person. Um, and then after you do that, we can then address the question of why we get these huge descriptions in the first place. I like them, but they're not strictly necessary. A lot of it isn't necessary. It's cool, but it's not necessary. And so, if you can figure out a way to make it necessary and have the first third person split married into the necessity of these descriptions, that is what you're aiming for, and it's damn hard. I think this is one of the hardest tasks you've set for yourself ever. This is like it's so fundamental and yet difficult to abstract. Making an abstraction of this problem is quite difficult. But if you can nail it, this could be a really interesting story. Yeah, 100%. It's a challenge. If you can pull it off, I'd be super impressed. But I think it's two things you need to do. It's marrying this detail in a necessary way to the plot. That's one. And in addition, thinking of a way that you can use your first/third person switch to good effect. Do both, and we'll all be cheering for you because that's what we're after. Yep. I'll go back and read some comments too. So, Panfro says, I'm not experienced enough to make this claim, but is it bad form to use the POV shift for multiple aspects, such as using it to depict the character's morality and using it to depict the city/atmosphere? Hmm. Um. I think that there's a way that you could do it so that you can have this multifaceted approach. It makes more sense in my mind to have it married to a theme or some sort of common emotional state. So, for instance, if we're going for the split between minimizing my immorality and building myself up as a good character, um, when when the narrator starts to refer to themselves in a virtuous way using the third person, that's a positive thing. when the character is walking through the city and looking at some of the fun things that are happening, like the boys who chase the dogs down the street. That could be told in a third person. The man watched with a flicker of nostalgia burning in his heart as he saw the orphan boys playing with the dog, something like that. Whereas if he is, for instance, a bit perturbed by the presence of the whores, for instance. Maybe one of the whores reminds him too much of someone in his village. Maybe the whores looks too much like his wife. That could be minimized in the first person, right? So that's how you'd start to marry what I was talking about before with what we were talking about just then with Panthro. Can you use that POV split for dual purpose? I'd argue that we should. I'd argue that it's actually quite important to do that. But very difficult, so if we can get it working, then good for us. But we'll have to see how we go. I feel like I've given enough visual indicator for how, verbal indicator for how that could be done. But I don't want to write over the story too much. I think Outrider has to come to that understanding himself. And I guess that's the point of this kind of edit that we're doing today. More of a developmental edit, talking about how the story is flowing together. I mean, I could try and give a written description, but what I was saying out loud as example sentences is probably just as good. Mm. Right, this thing here, yeah. Mm. Mm. Good. I think we're all on the same page when it comes to this. Mm. I think the best summary is this. I betrayed my own objective. And I think that's the best piece of advice we can take from all of this. Regardless of if it's too purple or overblown, or if it's too much description, or if it's too extraneous, I'm not so concerned about that right now. I want you to prove to me that a story can function like this. But I think the way that you want to do it is to use that first and third person split to convince me that this is justified. And until then, I can't come in and be like, no, this is too extraneous. We don't need to know that Lilac and Dragonflower do this and that. Like in a normal edit, I'd be all over this and be like, look, this is a little too overblown. Just to start to pick it apart. But I want to see what it looks like if you stick to what you'd set out to do at the start. So I think that's kind of where we're at. Good, good, excellent, excellent day. Well, let's press on then. I want to see if there's like another little chunk here that we can deal with. I've got quite a few people watching. Cool. Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome if you're new. Please feel free to say hello. Either in Twitch chat here. I actually have a Discord too. If you look underneath the video you're currently watching on my homepage, I guess is what you call it, you'll see a Discord banner there. And you can click through on that and come and say hi. It's mostly just us, the same people here, talking about writing and other things. Mostly writing, actually. We're pretty good. And if you'd like to have something looked at by myself or other people, plop it in on Discord, and we can all have a crack at it. Yeah, welcome new people. It's always good to have new people on board. Oh, and by the way, we're editing OutriderSG's story. This is his Fadewalker. I think that was clear from what we were talking about before. And also by the title of the stream. But it was the soldiers that I minded as I limped on. They patrol the streets among. Sorry, I'm gonna pop in there. If you want to bring the reader back to reality after having this quite long piece of descriptive prose pushed into the narrative, um, this is a great way to bring it back to reality by switching back to first person. That intuitively feels like, okay, time to get down to business. This is where we're at. So you can use that to good effect too. They patrol the streets among the denizens of Storm Harbor. Each was vowed to keep the peace, but infamous for shaking down locals and newcomers alike. I would like to see this instead of having it told to me. Can you make them shake down a beggar or something? This would also help ground the scene as well. Right in front of him. Yeah, that I think would be stronger to do it that way. The outsider drew his hood further down his face. His aim was any of the dozen or so taverns situated along the boardwalk. He would book passage across the Sea of Arrows. He would head south further still. Now, good place to re-highlight the motive. The huntsman. That's a great photo. Yeah. Hang on. Whenever you say huntsman, I can't help think of this guy here. Yeah. Yeah, look at him. This is a huntsman spider. How big would that one be? Palm size, I guess. Look, it's eating a little. It's eating a little something. Isn't that lovely? Yeah. Sorry, that's purely my distraction there. From having read The Huntsman. So yeah, the huntsman's after him, right? Just there's no harm in getting your character slash narrator to restate the motive. It's a nice little sort of sprinkly thing every now and then. Kill it with fire. Very cute. It is very cute, isn't it? Little smiley faces on them too. Also, good morning, TTLACC. I haven't heard from you this morning. Did you just pop on? Yeah, sorry. I was considering whether or not it was inappropriate for me to show a huge spider on my stream, but I actually had something there to that effect, detailing his motive, but I waffled on in favor of conversation later on in this story. Let's see if that is as effective as what it could be. Hmm. No worries. No worries. Well, it's good to have you. Good to have you back for the stream. So this is Sean's Fadewalker, and what we're doing today is, I suppose, a little more developmental. I mean, I've looked at more of if you go back and have a look, lots of lines, but probably not as much as what I'm used to seeing. We've been talking more about the development of a story, and especially something that Sean has been playing with. Actually, I think I'll show this to you, and for people who maybe caught the stream in a bit of an interesting time, have a read of these sentences here. Rumour was the stranger came from beyond the mountains of Lear. Fishmongers muttered as he rode past. The tanners at their rack, the weavers at their loom, and the steelsmiths at their forge all agreed the man came from the desert lands of red dunes, the high plateau, the sea of deer. The whispers about me were right, or the whispers were right about me. So we have this split between the first and third person, but it's actually, so it's the same person. The stranger and me is the same. What we're trying to do with this story edit today is to see how we can push this through the narrative and make it work. We had some really good advice, some good good kinds of discussions here about what it means to have a consistent point of view. And if you're going to be inconsistent with point of view, you need a reason. And if you don't have a reason, your reader will hate you. So it's about marrying your intention of having a split point of view and making it justifiable with the flow of a narrative. I think that's what we're really dealing with today. I don't want to do anything after what I've just heard. Fair. But if you do see like little points that you think could be stronger, feel free to jump in, Sayaka. Some of your suggestions today have been really good, especially like some of the stuff here I thought was really on point. So thank you very much. Where are we? Yep. 5.1. Oh my goodness. You need the subwoofer to get the most out of my very masculine, totally not effeminate voice. Wonderful. Those speakers, they're all the neighbors. I love it. 7.1. Um, I think line edits are always appreciated too, because when people can go back and reconfigure things, it just helps them to, um, like even if they don't 100% follow your line edits, it's more about getting them into the feel of changing things. Um, at least that's from my point of view. So, um, yeah, I wouldn't feel too bad about feeling as though your feedback is not warranted here. I think you're more than welcome to. Um, yeah, do what you're comfortable with, I think. Um, or if you're just content to sit back and let it roll, all good. As he carried on down the street, the grey brand felt the pain in his ankle pulse with every step. Now, we've got a reference to grey band here before, but it was capitalized. So I guess you have to be consistent and capitalize all the grey bands. Which I assume is like some sort of mercenary band or a type of soldier. I don't particularly know at this point, but I'll just sort of suspend my lack of knowledge and push forward. I'll read a little bit before going back. As he carried on down the street, the grey brand felt... Oh, actually, no, sorry. I'm going to contradict myself here. Okay, so the outsider drew his hood further down his face. So the purpose of this paragraph... The purpose of this paragraph is to, I suppose, hint at the fact that he's shielding himself from the law. I feel as though it's a bit too... This feels like it is necessary to the plot, but the level of attention to detail that is afforded for this section feels lacking, especially relative to the... Whoops, excuse me, especially relative to the detail... I don't want to call it a dump. A detailed... So I guess just have a think about why this paragraph is here, and if, for instance, this big 454 word section overshadows what is actually an important part of the story. One of the real downsides of doing the lavish descriptions is that sometimes it's a bit difficult for your reader to pick up on what's important. If you do it too much, this juicy narrative detail just kind of gets lost. As he carried on down the street, the grey brand felt the pain in his ankle pulse with every step, but he walked on undeterred. Minutes later, the stranger came upon the magistrate's office. A large green sign hung over the entryway, as the round man had said it did. I think I'll let Psycho suggest something here. I think Psycho's going to be on the ball with that. It was gilded in eccentric, wavy flourishes, which set the otherwise unremarkable structure apart from those around it. Ordinarily, the Outsider's work as a grey brand. I bring him before a prefect of a city. There was always someone in need of retribution. There you go. So now I know what a grey band is. Not a highborn's sort of justice, for lowborns were afforded no such consideration. No, the troubles of the common people, the small folk, the forgotten, those fell to men like me. Here's where we get back into the first person, or at least the self-reflexive narrator. The Order of the Grey Brands was an ancient profession, one which had dwindled as the centuries turned. You could probably... This could be summarized in a piece of dialogue from someone later. Not many of your kind left, ain't there? So that's the sort of detail that you want to sort of put into the background sense. Beholden to no law, nation, or king, the Grey Ones had been the only recourse for many, provided they had the coin. Their expenses accrued in the pursuit of justice, after all. The man walked past the magistrates. Something. Continuing down the road as the evening set upon the city. So he's heading towards the tavern, right? One by one, the braziers were addressed by lamp lighters. They carried clay pitchers of oil, spilling it onto the pyres before setting the torches to each. And the last of the sun's light shimmered on the water as the stranger took his first step onto the boardwalk. It was damp and moaned as the tide crashed into the pilings. A mist of salt water sprayed over the railings, and it grew chill on the wind, wetting his coat and face. His horse, who he had yet to name, snorted as his hooves met the planks. I felt him pull away. The charger was not fond of the water, I discovered. They're just going to make edits. I don't know what to say to this. I wish Libo was my dad. You are all my children? I don't know, that sounds weird. 3 miles from the gate. Okay, cool. Oh, be the person that Lyrebird would wish you were, son. I like that sentiment. Storm Harbour was in the swing of its busiest trade season. I want to read a bit more before I come back and talk about this in a narrative sense. I think Psycho's having fun up here. So Storm Harbour was in the swing of its busiest trade season. Up and down the shore, the port hosted all manner of ships. 2-masted schooners shuttled mercenaries from the weeping coast. Brigantine clippers hauled goods from Vays and Lanteas. Fast-moving cutters carried soldiers who patrolled the Arrows, and 60-old galleys laid anchor in the harbour. Nearly every vessel from Cog to Carrick honoured the tradition of raising red sails in the port of storms. They looked as if to set the sea ablaze just as the sun disappeared over the horizon. Night fell swift after that. The Outsider moved east along the boardwalk, past mariners, longshoremen, shipwrights, and more soldiers than he could count. The perfume of cheap wine and cheaper ale carried on the sea breeze. The drunken harbour folk wore the aroma in their clothing, and the smell even crept up from the deck. A history of 1,000 drunken sailors had been imbued in the wood. The destrier blew through his nostrils. He contempted the odour, and I petted him on the neck and brushed his shoulder. He calmed. Before long, the grey brand found himself standing in front of a noisy establishment, the White Petrel, the type of bird. He loitered outside, observing the patrons as they came and went. The tavern was a popular choice, life of drunkards, wenches, mariners, and the men of Storm Harbour's watch. get rid of the semicolon there. He moved on, limping to a smaller tap house further down the boardwalk. Oh, okay. He moved on, limping to a small tap house further down the boardwalk. I thought he was going to go inside. A simple wooden sign hung over the doorway, listing in the breeze. A black bear was painted on each side, and beneath the creature the words "Mad Bear" were burned into the wood. This place, I recognise the name from somewhere else. You can do full stop or ellipses here, I think. The man led his horse to the side of the building and looped the reins around. A hitch, I'll be back for you. The horse snorted again, then kicked its hooves in the mud. It was quiet inside the Mad Bear. The air was stale, dense with incense and wood smoke that poorly masked the smell of drunken bile. A fire warmed the hearth, flickering as embers cracked from the fireplace. Across from the entrance, a thick man staggered out from the pantry behind the bar, carrying a keg on one shoulder as if it were linens. He let it slam on the counter behind him, then retrieved a wooden mallet and proceeded to hammer a bronze spigot into the vent. With that finished, he turned to the stranger and eyed him head to toe. He wiped his hands clean on his shirt. Fuck off, outsider. You've a look about you. A look, is it? Aye, one that reeks of shit, and I don't need no flies. We do attract. Hear me, I'll have none of that in the bear. This is my tavern, and it's all I got. He slammed his finger onto the counter, pointing at a wine stain in the oak. Pointing to a wine stain in the oak? Let's cut there and talk about this section here. So, I want to... The 454 words from before is now almost 1100 in terms of the time that we enter the city versus the time where we actually get to the destination. So, let me brew on that for a second while I go back into the chat. I think the smaller cheap women and even cheaper ale. I think. Mm, it's certainly fitting for a very sort of typical kind of old ages fantasy-esque port town sort of thing. So I think in terms of like this description, the smell of cheap women and even cheaper ale, um, is a fitting description for what the story is going for. Misogynistic, sure, but like I think it's fitting for the context of the story. Um, I think you can always justify like negative portrayals of people or dehumanizing portrayals of people if you can make it fit into a context in which it is I don't want to say expected, but if it makes sense that it's going on. I mean, this isn't 2010's um, modern era. It's of a different time, I guess. And yeah, humans have always been a bit shit. So with their behavior in general. These 1100 words that we're dealing with here from the time that the character enters the city versus gets to his destination is thick. It's a full bodied description of what's going on inside the city. I love I love how alive the detail feels. I love how um, I have this really good image in my head of what's gone on. But because I'm more on the pumpkin pie addict side of storytelling, I ask myself the question, why did we need most of that? As lovely as it was, and as beautiful as the descriptions were, and as fully fleshed out as the world appears. Um, I don't know if it serves the story particularly well in terms of what could be condensed down to a single paragraph. So, for instance, if he comes through the gate and then nature doesn't grow here, as I think what was I think the line. Nature is lost here. Nature, I'd loitered by my stables. Nature was hidden here, and I found myself swept along in the chaos of this city. Um, I saw XYZ. I saw blah blah blah. Um, Through the organized chaos of people living their lives, I found myself stumbling down to the docks. 1,001 ships with their red sails glisten in the evening light as I walked down the boardwalk, and in the near distance I found my mark, the mad bear. So, for instance, if this kind of detail can be compressed into a paragraph, you can start here, and by here end up at the mad bear. You lose an awful lot of grounding, though. That's the only other thing to consider. Again, I'm willing to see what you can make of this first third person splitting story structure. If you can convince me that there's a reason why over the course of 1100 words in a 7,000 word story in total that I am privy to the inner workings of the city. If you can convince me for a reason as to why it's there, I'm on board. Just give me a reason and I will sit with your story and I will allow myself to be swept along in the detail. If it's not there, as lovely as it is, I feel like I'm a bit cut adrift and off in the sea of description, so to speak. Yeah. Right, I think that's the case here. It's lovely writing, but it's like it says, it's like pushing a stake through your heart. Like, oh, I like this, but does it fit? Yeah. It's painting a picture to set the mood, exactly. I think what I can do is make characters interact with the environment to set the mood. Great idea, rather than describing each thing he sees. So, case in point would be, here, like, you can actually show the guards, um, roughing up a beggar. Up here with the women of the night, you could have them either interact with the character or remind the character of something that's happened in his past. Character interactions would certainly help it justify its existence. Even then, it becomes it still has a bit of an element of walking through a linear corridor of description. Really, your character is getting from A to B in this context here, and but if you can find ways to marry the character interactions with the description, and think of a way that you can use your first person split to minimize and maximize different elements, I would be more amenable to sitting here and reading through the nitty gritty detail. Um, right, exactly. So if you start to introduce things like that, I treat all my readers like stupid children. No, you don't have to do that. Oh, really? Is there a character limit, is there? Yeah, I think there must be a character limit, actually. Break it up over several. um, I'm trying to think of anything else to suggest. It's certainly a style choice that we're going for here. Um, the real epic fantasy kind of block descriptions. In that case, I may be a bit misplaced in saying just cut it back, get to the point of a story, but the point of an epic fantasy story is that you do have this detail. And if you want to keep it, I think we've discussed ways to justify it. I'm just reading all of this. Hmm. I think that's certainly writing to market spec in terms of knowing what your readers are like. This is especially true if you write in a genre that has a particular way of dealing with how fast the story is supposed to be moving. So, for example, Pumpkin Pie Addicts stories tend to, I mean, the ones we've seen with Grimm, tend to be a lot more action focused. So it makes sense for Pumpkin Pie Addict to want to have that setup, payoff, and just push through with detail. It totally makes sense. In an epic fantasy style story, it may be different. Because people who read epic fantasy expect epic fantasy. It's not like, oh, why is there so much description in this epic fantasy story? Said no epic fantasy reader ever. It's like, you have to know sort of what your readers expect. And so I think it's really good advice from Pumpkin Pie Addict here. Um, hmm. I think Pumpkin Pie Addict, though, also hints at something about the fundamental nature of a story, too, in that um, you can have these, like, in terms of epic fantasy, these blocks of text are permissible. Regardless, though, the very first part of your story, doesn't matter what genre you're writing in, it should make sense to your reader as to what you're setting up and executing. And yeah, as you said before at OutriderSG, it's about setting yourself the challenge of using this split in a way that makes sense throughout the rest of your story. That's your hook. It's the Kevin Spacey moment where he turns to the camera and breaks the fourth wall. That's this here. And you've set yourself that challenge, and you need to be consistent with it throughout and use it to good effect, especially if you're going to have 1100 words of A to B motion description. Um, you need to be consistent in challenging yourself to use the narration to good effect like that. Um, why don't we cut it there for today? I think we've dealt with a 800-page story. Not impossible to do, that's for sure. But certainly very heavy. Hi, Liberto114. Bye, Liberto114. I'm heading off. Very good timing. Yeah. Hmm. Maybe also it helps with I'm not going just yet. I'll wrap up soon, but yeah, maybe it's also because readers you give them a reason to stay and they'll stay. And I think that's what you want to do in the opening couple of pages. You want to give them a reason to stay, and then they can take the cabbage along with the sweets, as Pumpkin Pie was saying. But yeah, I think I'm in agreement there. Hmm. But yeah, we'll call it quits there today because we've had a really big discussion here about the way that this story is working, and I think it's been fascinating just looking at all the little details and how everything is coming together. Thank you, Sean, for showing this to us. This has been a really interesting experience. And I think like I've learned heaps just by having to be confronted with something like this. I feel like we've touched on some really good fundamentals. And if you'd like to go and re-watch the stream, Liberta, and see what we were talking about, you can pop onto YouTube and watch the replay there. I may continue on with this story for Thursday, or I may choose something else. I'll decide over Discord. I may not be here Thursday night, but I will pick another night this week to stream. I'll let you know in Discord with my announcements thing. And I'll change the countdown timer too as well on my Twitch page. Good. And with that, I think I might wrap up this stream. So thank you for people for joining in today. I hope this was really useful. I had a lot of fun doing this. Good stuff. Join me in Discord throughout the week. I'll try and be on a bit more this week. And we can continue the chats. So we'll see you on one day this week. Yeah. No trouble, Sean. All good. We'll catch you all later.